Mike Tyson didn't need luck. He had spent his life winning with his fists, not with cards. But when he entered that casino, he wasn't looking for a fight, just a quiet night, a few hands on the table, nothing serious. Until he saw that the game was already decided before the cards were dealt. It wasn't obvious to most. The casual gamblers, the tourists, the high-level gamblers who thought they were untouchable, they didn't see it. But Max does. The dealer's hands were moving with too much precision. The same players kept winning too easily. And the losers. They didn't just leave, they left ruined, broken, desperate. Then, Mac heard it. A shortness of breath. A chair scratching the floor. A man at the other end of the table, looking at his last chips, his face pale, his fingers trembling. He wasn't just losing. He was being ripped off. And when he pushed his last stack of chips, when the dealer dealt the last hand, when the man's shoulders slumped in defeat, Mac knew that this was not just bad luck. It was a setup. And Mac Tyson. I was about to dismantle it. Mike Tyson had been to casinos before. Some of the biggest, brightest, and most exclusive in the world. But this one was different. Not because of how it looked, it had the typical neon lights, the expensive decoration. The dealers in impeccable suits behind gleaming tables. But because of how he felt. From the moment he walked in, something didn't fit. It wasn't the smell of stale cigars. It wasn't the clinking of chips or the whirring of slot machines. They were the people. The way some players sat too confidently, as if they already knew the result of the game. The way the dealer's hands moved, not only gently, but too gently. And the way the losers walked away, not frustrated, not disappointed, but completely empty. Mac had spent his life reading people, and the people in this casino were telling him everything he needed to know. This was not just bad luck. It was a setup. Casinos were designed to make you feel invincible. The flashing lights, the hypnotic sound of the chips clinking, the thrill of winning, the crushing silence of losing. All carefully calculated to keep you playing, to make you stick your hand deeper in your pockets. To make you believe that one more bet could change everything. Mike Tyson had seen it before. I had seen men come in with confidence, and come out turned into ghosts of themselves. And now, I was watching it again. On the other side of the table sat a man who seemed to have everything. A tailored suit, a gold watch that sparkled under the candlelight, a stack of chips that should have given him security. But I wasn't safe. Because Mac saw the signs. The sweat on his forehead. The way his hands were shaking when he reached for his chips. The way he was no longer betting to win, but because he had no other choice. And in a place like this, that's when they got you trapped. Mike wasn't playing yet. I was just watching. And the more I watched, the more I saw. The man had been losing for hours. And not only losing, but bleeding to death. Every hand, every bet, every desperate attempt to recover just one more day. And in front of him, the dealer. Unchanging expression. Controlled. As if I already knew the result before the cards were dealt. That's when Max's instincts kicked in. This man was not just someone with bad luck. He was a victim. The casinos were based on illusion. They made you feel that you were in control, that the cards were just a game of chance, that winning was always one hand away. Weird Mac had spent his life studying on the go, reading people, knowing when someone was holding back and when he was playing seriously. And this dealer. It was too fluid. His hands moved mechanically, without hesitation, without ever hesitating. The way he shuffled, the way he dealt, the way he barely reacted when the man lost another big bet. It wasn't natural. Mickey had fought too many battles not to recognize when a fight was fixed. And this fight. It was over before it even started. The man exhaled sharply, his breathing shaky, his fingers tapping on the table as if he were telling something he no longer had. Chips. They almost didn't fit him. But instead of retreating, instead of taking his losses, instead of admitting defeat, he did what desperate men do. He took out his wallet. Max knew what that meant. He wasn't playing with his money anymore. I was playing with theirs. And in a casino like this, that was the most dangerous gamble of all. The moment the man pulled out his credit card, the dealer didn't even look at him. I didn't have to. Instead, his eyes moved, barely for a second, to the back of the room. Mac followed the look. And there, standing in the shadows, were two men in suits. They weren't players. They were not security. They were something else. They weren't watching the game. They were watching the man. Waiting. Like predators watching their prey that had wandered too far out in the open. And that's when Mac found out this wasn't just a bad night. It was a trap. The casino didn't care about luck. He didn't care about justice. And much less did he care about the man sitting across from Mac, trying to pretend that his world wasn't about to collapse around him. Because once you crossed that line, once you started playing with money that wasn't yours, there was no going back. And Mac had seen too many people lose everything to let it happen again. The dealer slid the credit receipt on the table. "Are you sure?" he asked in a soft, rehearsed voice, as if he already knew the answer. The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple rising and falling. Then, slowly, he nodded. And in the instant in what did he do it? Mike stood up. The table fell silent. The players who were chatting, the ones who were too drunk to realize what was happening, felt the change in the air. Because when Matt Tyson moves, when he stands up, when he makes it clear he's paying attention, people notice. And at that moment, everyone noticed it. The dealer hesitated. The men in suits in the background straightened up. And Mac didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was enough to stop the whole game. The man who had just gambled more than he could afford finally looked at Mac. And in his eyes, Mac saw it all. Fear. Regret. Despair. The crushing, silent weight of a man who had just made a decision he couldn't take back. But Mac also saw something else. A plea. I wasn't asking for help. But I needed her. And Mac wasn't going to let her drown. Mike turned his gaze to the dealer, his expression indecipherable, his body calm, controlled, motionless. "Have you ever thought about repeating that hand?" he asked, in a low voice, but one that was heard clearly throughout the table, like a warning. The dealer tensed up. The men in suits in the background took a step forward. And for the first time since Mac had entered the casino, those running the game no longer seemed so sure of themselves. Because they had manipulated the game for years. They had taken money from people who never fought back. But now, they had just tried to fool the wrong man. Mac didn't raise his voice. He didn't hit the table with his fists. I didn't need it. Because I knew something they didn't know. I knew that true power is not about who speaks the loudest. It's about who people listen to when they don't say anything at all. And at this moment, everyone was listening. The dealer's hands trembled. The men in suits in the background hesitated. And the man who had lost everything. Suddenly, he didn't seem so alone anymore. Because Mac Jackson was standing next to him. And tonight, this was no longer just about a card game. It was about ending a scam. And Mac Tyson. He was about to play his own hand. Casinos have never been quiet. They were designed to be alive, machines ringing, chips jingling, laughter, celebrations, frustrations, and the incessant shuffling of cards. But at this moment, when Mick Jackson stood up, everything stopped. The croupier froze, his fingers still resting on the last card he had dealt. The man who had lost everything remained motionless, his breathing short, his fingers trembling over the pile of debt he had just accepted. And in the back of the hall, where the real power of the casino lurked, the two men in suits finally moved. They had been watching for hours, waiting for exactly this moment. A player who could not pay. A gambler who had gone too far. A customer who had just crossed the line between being a simple gambler and seeing the casino more than he could ever repay. But what they didn't expect was that someone else was also watching. And that someone. It was Mac Tyson. Mike didn't need to scream. He didn't need to pound the table with his fist. He didn't need to do anything but stand there, his eyes fixed on the dealer, his body completely motionless. And at that moment, the power in the room changed. Because in this casino, where the house always won, they had never had to face someone like him before. A man who was not afraid of them. A man who could not be intimidated. A man who had spent his whole life facing opponents who thought they were stronger, faster, more powerful, until they stopped being so. And now, the same look he had given on the Rhine, the same presence that had broken the fighters before the first blow was thrown. I was giving it to them. And they were not prepared for it. The man who had lost everything kept looking at his cards, as if he hoped that if he looked at them long enough, the result would change. But there was no way to change it. The game was fixed. The house had won. And now, it belonged to them. But then, slowly, as if waking from a dream, he looked up. He looked at the dealer. He looked at the men in suits in the background. And then, finally, he looked at Mac. And in that moment, for the first time all night, he realized something. He was no longer alone. The dealer had been impeccable all night. Too impeccable. But now, his hands were no longer so firm. The way he held the deck, the way he adjusted his tie, the slight movement of his eyes towards the back of the living room, everything was different now. Because Mac wasn't just another player. Mike wasn't just another client who had lost and would walk away defeated. Mike was something else. Something they weren't prepared for. Something they didn't have a plan for. And that made them nervous. The two men in the background exchanged glances. A silent conversation passed between them. This is not how the night should have gone. They had seen players lose before. They had watched as they emptied their pockets, signed their assets, fell into the system that kept the casino under control. But never like this. Never with a man like Mick Jackson watching. And for the first time, they hesitated. Why? What happens when the house wins, but someone refuses to accept it? What happens when the person standing in the way is not afraid? What happens when Tyson, a man who has spent his whole life fighting, decides that this is not a fight he is willing to let them win? They didn't know. But they were about to find out. Max leaned forward, resting his huge hands on the table, his gaze fixed on the dealer. "Hand them out again," he said. His voice was not strong. I didn't need to do it. Because the way he said it. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And at that moment, the entire casino held its breath. The dealer didn't rule here. I've never done it before. It was only the intermediary, the face of the scam, who maintained the illusion, while the real power hid in the shadows. And now, I didn't know what to do. So he did what weak men always do when they find themselves in a situation they don't know how to handle. He sought permission. His eyes moved to the bottom. Towards the men in suits. Towards those who had been in charge all night until now. And in that moment, Mac knew. They had to make a decision. The problem with running a rigged game. You just can't afford to be found out. Because once people realize that the game is fake, once they see the pattern, once they understand that the house not only wins, but decides who loses, it's all over. And by this time, Mac had unmasked them. I didn't need to say it out loud. I didn't need to expose them. He just had to stay there. Because now everyone was watching. And for the first time all night, the casino was losing control. The two men in the background were not stupid. They had seen situations like this before, but never with someone like Tyson. If they said no, they forced the man to leave, if they made it clear that they were running a rigged game in front of everyone. It was a problem. But if they accepted, if they allowed the game to be replayed, if they really gave the man a fair chance, they could lose. And that was also a problem. But there was no way out. Mike had left them no choice. So, after a long and tense moment, after exchanging glances that reflected frustration, anger and grudging acceptance, one of the men nodded slightly. And at that moment, the dealer started shuffling. The cards hit the table. Slow. Deliberate. And this time, Mike was watching. The dealer's hands were no longer so firm. The energy in the room had changed. And when the last card fell, this time, for the first time all night, the house won. The man who had been sinking. He got everything back. And so, all of a sudden, the game was over. The scam had been revealed. And the people who ran this place, they knew they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. Because tonight they had not only lost money. They lost something much worse. They lost control. And in a place like this, that was everything. The casinos were based on control. Every game, every bet, every rule was designed to keep the house on top. But at this moment, they had lost him. Tyson wasn't just another high-level player. He was not another desperate gambler who could be manipulated, bullied, or tricked into accepting defeat. He had changed the rules. Now, everyone in the room was watching those who run the casino. And for the first time, the house was not in charge. Because tonight, Tyson had made the rules. The dealer's hands were shaking. The two men in suits at the back of the room, the ones they had watched with confidence all night, the ones who had barely moved, were no longer so calm. They exchanged glances. Subtle. Quickly. A silent conversation passed between them. Because they knew what had just happened. They had been exposed. And in his world, that was the worst thing that could happen. But now, they had to make a decision. A decision they never thought they would have to make. A decision that would determine whether this night ended in silence or in chaos. A good dealer never showed emotion. But this dealer. He looked like a man who had just realized that he was about to be thrown to the wolves. He had been the face of the scam, the man who moved the cards, the illusion that made everything seem real. But now, the illusion had been broken. And when he reached out his hand to push the chips towards the man who had won, his hands were no longer steady. Because I knew it. He wasn't the one running the game anymore. One of the men the bottom finally moved. Slow, careful, calculated. Like a man walking into a situation he was no longer sure he could control. He was dressed elegantly, impeccably, a man used to running things from the shadows. But now, I had no choice but to come forward. And as he approached the table, stopping in front of Macassan, he forced a smile. It wasn't real. It was survival. And everyone in the room knew it. Mr. Tyson, the man said in a soft, rehearsed voice, the kind of voice that had convinced a lot of people to make a lot of bad decisions. But Mac wasn't listening to the words. I was listening to the tone. The hesitation. The discomfort. The way the man's hands remained at his sides, not clenched, not threatening, but not relaxed either. Because this wasn't just about money. This was about a system that had never been questioned. Until now. And the man standing in front of Mac. I was trying to figure out how to regain control. The man exhaled, keeping his voice balanced. We appreciate your concern, he said, nodding towards the table. But this establishment operates under strict equity policies. If you think there was a problem with the game, we are willing to discuss it in private. Mike didn't blink. He didn't move. He didn't even recognize the words. Because I knew what this was. A bluff. An attempt to get him out of the public eye. An attempt to make all this go away. And the bad thing about the lanterns. They only work if the other person doesn't see them coming. Normally, such situations could be resolved in silence. Usually, the casino made problems disappear with a few whispers, a few well-positioned security guards, a few threats behind closed doors. But tonight, everyone was watching. The players had stopped their own games. The crowd had gathered around the table, whispering, eyes darting between Mac and the men who had just been exposed. And in a place where the house always won, people were starting to wonder if that was really true. And that was the casino's worst nightmare. The man in the suit exhaled, his forced smile never fading. Why don't we keep it simple? He said in a calm, controlled voice, but with a hidden edge. He nodded towards the chips on the table. We will allow your friend to keep his winnings, of course, he continued, in measured words. And in return, we will consider this an unfortunate misunderstanding, and move on smoothly. It was a deal. A carefully designed exit. A way to make sure Max left, that everything ended here, that the house never had to explain why the game suddenly turned right at the moment he got involved. But the problem? Mike Tyson wouldn't take deals that weren't real. Mike didn't smile. He did not nod. He didn't acknowledge the deal at all. Instead, he reached out his hand, took a single poker chip from the table, and rolled it between his fingers. Then, finally, he spoke. "Hand them out again," he said. The man in the suit blinked. "Excuse me." Matt placed the chip on the table. "Pass them out again," he repeated, his voice firm, unshakable. "Shuffle the cards. Let's see if the house continues to win." The crowd murmured. The dealer swallowed hard. The men in suits in the background tensed up. And the man in front of Mac. I knew I had already lost. The game did not continue. The dealer did not shuffle the cards. The house doubled the bet. Because they couldn't. They had already been caught. And when McCason turned, when he walked away from the table, when the weight of what had just happened fell on the entire casino, one truth became clear. This wasn't just about a man getting his money back. This wasn't just about a rigged game. This was about the moment the casino realized that power only worked if people believed in it. And tonight, Mike Tyson made them question everything. Casinos have never been quiet. Even in the later hours, there was always a murmur, the clinking of chips, the shuffling of cards, the low murmurs of winners celebrating and losers cursing their luck. But now, the whole room was completely silent. Because when Mac Jason walked away from the table, he didn't just take his presence with him. He took the power out of the house. The gamblers were still watching, still frozen in place, their drinks forgotten, their bets unfinished, their eyes jumping from the dealer to the men in the background who had run the game all night. They no longer looked at them with fear. They no longer looked at them as gods, as masters of fate, as men who controlled their fate. They looked at them as frauds. And in a casino, where the illusion of control was everything, that was more dangerous than anything else. The croupier was still there, still holding on to the deck of cards, his fingers tight around it, as if it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. He was supposed to be untouchable. Just another piece of the machine, just another moving part of a system that had worked for years without failing. But now, he was no longer just a dealer. He was a man who had been discovered. And by the way his hands were shaking, by the way his lips were parted, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words, it was clear. He knew it too. The two men who had been watching from the background were no longer moving. All night, they had been like statues, silent, powerful, watching every moment, every play, every desperate gambler who fell into their trap. But now, they had been beaten at their own game. Not with letters. Not hopefully. But with something they had never prepared for. With Mike Tyson. With a man who didn't play by his rules. With someone who had entered his casino and, without raising his voice, without throwing a single blow, had turned the whole game over. And as they stood there, motionless as shadows, like ghosts of their former power, they realized something they had never considered possible. Tonight, they weren't the ones in control. The crowd was still there, but they weren't playing anymore. No one was looking for his wallet. No one threw their bets on the table. No one was watching the dealer anxiously, waiting for his next hand. Because now, they saw him. They were seeing what had been hidden in plain sight all along. They saw the pattern, the manipulation, the deception. They could see that the house had never really been playing fair. And once you see something like that, you can't stop watching it. Normally, if someone caused a problem in a place like this, security would have acted immediately. They would have surrounded him, whispered something in his ear, giving him a friendly reminder of how things worked. And if that didn't work, he would have been taken out. Quietly. Without making a scene. Without anyone noticing. But Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson wasn't just anyone. And now, as I walked through the casino, as I passed by the tables, by the machines, by the players who were blind before, but could now see, not a single guard stepped forward. Why? Who was going to stop him? Who was going to try? Who was going to be the first one to stand in front of Mike Tyson and tell him he couldn't do what he had just done? No one. The player who had been at the center of it all was still sitting there, staring at the tiles in front of him, his hands hovering over them as if he couldn't believe they were real. Minutes ago, he was a man who had lost everything. Now, I had it all back. And not just his money. His dignity. His freedom. His chance to walk away without being another victim, another name on the casino's long list of men who had fallen too deep to get out. He looked at Mac, wide-eyed, still dazed, still shaking. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike stopped. Then, with a slight smile, he said the only thing that mattered. "Yes, I had to do it." And then he kept walking. It started as something small. A murmur. A whisper. People turning to each other, shaking their heads, talking quietly, looking around as if realizing for the first time that they were not alone in a casino. They were inside a machine designed to take everything from them. Someone walked away from a table. Then another one. Then another one. And in a matter of minutes, the whole room had changed. Not for a fight. Not because of an explosion. But because Mac Jason had made them see. And now, they weren't playing anymore. The casino would continue to operate. Of course I do. The lights would keep flashing. The cards would continue to be shuffled. The drinks would keep flowing. But it wouldn't be the same. Because tonight, the house had lost. Not just a game. Not just money. But something much more valuable. The illusion. The illusion that they were always in control. The illusion that the players were nothing but pawns. The illusion that no one would dare to challenge them and win. But Mac had proved them wrong. Mike came to the doors. He stopped. He took one last look at the back. The crowd was still watching. The men in suits in the background were still paralyzed. The dealer was still holding on to the cards as if they were the only thing keeping him up. And as he turned, stepping out into the cool night air, he did so knowing one thing for sure. They would never forget this night. Nor the players. Not even the casino. Not even the men who thought they owned that place. Because they had just learned a lesson they would never forget. And that lesson: never try to fool the wrong man. Mike Tyson had waged wars in the ring. He had received blows that would have finished off most men. He had come face to face with the best in the world and left them questioning everything they thought they knew about wrestling. But this was a different kind of victory. Because he hadn't needed to throw a punch. I didn't need to raise my voice. He had needed to do nothing but stand his ground and remind the world who he was. And as I was walking through the city, disappearing into the night, the legend of what had happened in that casino, I was just getting started. The casino wanted to move on. They wanted to forget. The men in suits tried to pretend it never happened. The dealer shuffled the cards again, but his hands were still not firm. The whispers didn't stop. The players were no longer betting as they used to. The illusion had cracked. The game was the same, but no one played it with blind faith anymore. Some came out, their pockets still full, their heads held higher than when they entered. Others. They stayed, but now they saw. And once you see, you never go back. Mike Tyson has never looked back. I didn't need it. The casino could try to repair its reputation. Trying to tighten up security. Trying to make sure that no one else would ever question their system again. But it didn't matter. Because now they had been exposed. And no matter how much money they made, no matter how many players cheated, no matter how many nights passed without anyone talking about what had happened, the night Mac Tyson came in and turned the game around would stay forever. Because the legends, they don't fade away. They grow up. Mike Tyson had spent his life fighting battles. In the ring. On the streets. In boardrooms. But this was one of the most satisfying victories of all. Because he didn't need the fists. He didn't need the anger. It took nothing but the truth and the power that comes from standing your ground when everyone expects you to give up. The house thought he was invincible. But tonight, Mike Tyson reminded them of something important. True power does not come from the one who controls the game. It comes from those who refuse to play by their rules.